So let's start here. I'm going to start by more or less drawing all the bones in the right view before moving on to the front view and finally drawing in the top view. Most of the bones actually get drawn in the right view. So I'll start off by maximizing full screen. And one of the things that's also very helpful before we start here, just as a last note, is if you go to the visibility options of each window and we use the visual cues tab of the camera visibility, or the front view visibility for that matter, we can turn on a ruler and get a sense of how tall our character is. So we have the character starting from a height of 0 on the ground up to a height of 20. And the way I use XSI's grid units is I usually set it up so that 3 of these grid units is equal to about a foot, or about 4 inches. So I'm going to, that looks pretty good. The character's about the right height. So I'm actually going to turn the ruler off. I'm just verifying that there. And the reason you would do this is because the bones tend to fit into the character best when the character is about that 3 grid units to a foot scale. So to start off, we're going to work with our 2D chain. Again, we don't really ever use 3D chains anymore, so I'm going to use the 2D chain. There's a bit more control. I'm going to start by placing a pivot right at the hip line. So right about there. Again, I need to turn on my X-ray shading. I'm going to place a pivot at the knee. So a lot of times people favor the knee right, the bone right in the middle of the geo, or some people favor it right at the edge. I kind of split the difference between them. I find I get the best results that way. And I'm going to place one more pivot right where the character's ankle would be. Like so. When it comes to legs, legs are one part of the body that most definitely use IK. They use the end effector to solve the position of the 2 bones above it in the hierarchy. And the fewer bones you have in an IK chain, the better. So we're going to middle click or right click to finish drawing the chain after we've placed 3 clicks. So root, knee, ankle. I'm going to begin drawing the foot chain by, again, just using the 2D chain command. And at the feet, this is one area where you want the beginning of one chain and the end of the previous chain to line up perfectly. So basically the starting point of this chain needs to be right superimposed over top of the effector's center. Now again, I can be a little bit loose here because I can draw the chain first. And I draw a 3-bone chain because this really helps me to add an extra pivot to control the foot roll, the roll of the foot as the character walks. I find one pivot just isn't enough half the time. So we have 2 pivots now to describe the foot roll. If I move into the camera view, you can see that the legs don't match up with the position of the bones. Now that's because in the right view everything's being drawn at x equals 0. So we just need to move the leg into the geometry. To do that, we try and avoid rotating or moving the bones as much as possible. You'll notice that when I've drawn the bones, their angles, if I just hit the rotation tool, we're looking at the local coordinate system of the bone here, we're looking at an angle of -90 on Z, on this chain 18 degrees. What we're trying to do is that if I activate the translate tool on this bone here, we're trying to make it so that the XY plane of the bone has absolutely no value assigned to it. So we want to leave it at 0, 0 as much as possible. The reason is because we're dealing with 2D chains, and 2D chains solve their IK using the XY plane of each bone. And if those XY planes happen to be out of alignment with one another, the very moment you select an end effector and move it, the chain is going to want to resolve itself and snap back into XY alignment. So for example, if I take this shin bone, which is at 0, 0 in X, it does have values in Z, that's fine, that's what we want. If I give it some value in Y, like 11 degrees, the instant I take that IK and move it, watch what happens. It just snaps. It tries to realign itself so that it stays in a 2-dimensional alignment with all the other bones in the chain. So the rule of thumb here, now again I'm just going to redraw this chain, is to make sure that we only add rotational values to the local z-axis of a bone if we have to get it to kind of sit in place. So again, we'll draw that. So we'll set the hip kind of right around there, the leg root, the knee, and the ankle. Alright, so that works pretty well. So now let's move this chain into place. The easiest way is just to grab the actual root element and slide it over. If you move the parent of a chain, it will automatically move the children. So I can actually move this down a little bit lower, which means I'll actually need to shrink the length of these bones a little bit. Now a lot of people will just take a bone and scale it. You can actually see scaling throws off our nice uniform 100% scale. And as much as possible when building skeletons, we try and keep the scale of our chains at 100%. So we can actually adjust the length of the bone without compromising our nice uniform scale by pressing enter on a bone and using the length attribute. There's also a size attribute that allows us to make the bones a little slimmer as well, or fatter if need be. So I'm just going to work the length, bring that length out to about so. And also work the length of this next chain here. It's a little long, so just by selecting it, the attribute editor refreshes, and I'll hold down Shift, and I'll shrink that up a little bit. And I'm probably going to rotate that chain forward just in the z-axis, just a hair. And if you find that it's a little bit too touchy, you can't quite get the placement you want, I would strongly encourage using the kinematics hotkey, Control-K, and using Shift on the Z slider here to fine-tune the angle. And you can close that property page when you're done. If I chain select or select the root, I'm going to just angle that knee a little better. Kind of like that. Again, just jump into Control-K. And if need be, you can do anything you want to the root element of the object, because the root is not solving the IK. The root is just rotating the entire chain in a two-dimensional plane, and it's not going to affect the IK solution. So rotating and moving the root is acceptable. It's the bones you have to be careful of. So I'll kind of do something like that. Now, I mentioned that with the foot needs to be completely, needs to be superimposed completely over top of the end effector of the previous chain. Now the easiest way to do that is to take the root element and use a transform tool, which is always dealing with centers, to match the translation of that element to a picked element. And in this case I'm just going to be picking the effector of the leg. So this doesn't actually parent or constrain the selected object to the picked object. It just moves the centers so that they align with one another. And then I'll take the root element and just orient it a little better, so it points sort of down the middle of the foot. And I also wanted to add an extra bone to this this chain here. So if I jump back in, I'm just going to redraw that chain. And I wanted a 3-bone chain, so I'll go here, here, say there, and I'll just reline that chain up again. Just select that root, match the position to the effector, and just adjust the orientation. So we have some pretty large icons here right now. The effector and root sort of look the same. We'll be addressing that in a moment. I'm just going to continue building the other chains in the body, and then we'll come back and address this issue.